Now, believe it or not, it's been 6 years since I started this channel right here on YouTube, and in that time, I've done a whole lot of videos. And so, in order to celebrate that, I decided that now would be a great time to revisit, revamp, and redo some older topics that we haven't touched in a while, including this one right here, which was one of the launch videos for this very channel, where I talked about the most successful outside talents in WWE. But since I have already redone that video, and in order to not be redundant, I figured let's do this as a kind of anti-reboot, if you will, where instead of looking at the most successful, I figured now let's look at the other end of the spectrum. And that's the topic of this episode. Because today, alright, so just like last time, there are going to be rules for this list, because if I just counted everybody that was underutilized by the WWE, well, that would be a really long list now, wouldn't it? And so, just like with the previous two videos, how well you did outside of WWE is going to be taken into account, as I'm only going to be looking at wrestlers who were world champions before they arrived in WWE, but then the real kicker is, after signing with Vince McMahon, they can't win any title of any kind at all. And so, while some of you out there might be expecting to see Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Mr. Perfect, or Kerry Von Erich on this list, just know that they are actually overqualified. And by the way, I'm only counting major recognized world championships before 2002. And again, we're doing this in order to keep the numbers down because this could be a really long video otherwise. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters such as Dakari Garmin and Rodney Harris. You really help to keep this channel going. Thank you. Alright, so before we get into the list, allow me to say that after 6 long years, I feel like I'm way overdue for that silver play button. So please, help me get to this goal by making sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that you're a member of the Know-It-All Nation. Remember, this is the Thinking Fans channel. And also, if you want to further support this channel, then please go over and check out my Patreon page, where you see brand new polls where Patrons get to vote on the kind of content that comes out going forward. Now, however you decide to support this channel, even if it's as simple as just watching the videos, I want you to know that I really do appreciate it, as it really does mean a lot, and it always will. Anyway, with that being said, now let's get into the list. Alright, so we're going to start this list off with a wrestler that some of you might already be thinking is breaking the rules, but hear me out on this one. While Scott Steiner has won the WWF World Tag Team Championship not once, but twice with his brother Rick, he did so before he ever became a WCW World Champion, which is an important distinction in this case. Now, in the beginning of his career, Scott debuted for the World Wrestling Association in 1986, before wrestling 2 years later for the Continental Wrestling Association, but after that, he would most famously debut in World Championship Wrestling, where he's probably most known for being a part of. But then, in 1992, him and his brother joined the World Wrestling Federation, where they would have 2 really short reigns with the WWF tag titles, trading back and forth with Money Inc. until their second and longer of the 2 reigns came to a close after losing to the Quebecers as the result of a Providence of Quebec rules match, where the belts could change hands via disqualification, which they did when the referee caught Scott Steiner with a hockey stick. Not long after that, and after only about 2 years, the brothers would leave the promotion, wrestling in both New Japan and Extreme Championship Wrestling before returning home to WCW. Once there, Scott would eventually break up with his brother and go out on more of a solo run, as well as tag teaming with Buff Bagwell. But as a solo act, Scott will win multiple singles titles, such as the Television Championship and the United States Championship. But of course, the crowning achievement would be WCW's World Heavyweight title. But then, after the sale to WWE, Steiner decided not to join right away, and instead he waited till his contract ran out. And then, in late 2002, Steiner would join World Wrestling Entertainment yet again, where he would be put in a main event feud against Triple H. However, despite Hunter having the title at the time, this didn't result in Scott Steiner getting the favors done for him and becoming champion himself. And then, after less than 2 years, Scott Steiner would find himself leaving the House of McMahon yet again. And so, now that we covered that, I think you see how Scott Steiner qualifies. Beginning his career wrestling in 1962, the man who would become known as Rugged Ronnie Garvin would start wrestling for Jim Crockett Promotions in the mid-1980s, where he would win the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. This all started in 1987, when Garvin entered a feud with then-champion Ric Flair over Precious. But then, later on in the year, Crockett would find out that the NWA's biggest show, Starrcade, would be going heads up against WWF's first ever Survivor Series. And so, in order to combat this, the decision was made made that their biggest star, Ric Flair, would have to win the title on their biggest show. The only problem was he was already champion, and so a plan was concocted that Flair would drop the title to someone only to get it back at Starrcade. However, while many wrestlers didn't want to be a mere 2-month transitional champion, Ronnie Garvin, at his age, figured that this might be his only opportunity to ever hold a major world title. And well, quite frankly, he was right. Because not long after giving the title right back to Ric Flair, he would join the World Wrestling Federation in 1988. However, during his 2 years with the company, he didn't really accomplish all that much, mostly serving in lackluster feuds until he left in 1990. And now we move into a perfect example of a wrestler who seemed like he was destined to be WWF World Champion, only to never get that or anything at all. The total package Lex Luger sure seemed like he had everything going for him. Beginning his career in 1985 in Championship Wrestling from Florida, he would soon move to Jim Crockett Promotions and World Championship Wrestling. And from there, he would become United States Heavyweight Champion as well as World Heavyweight Champion. All this before leaving for the World Wrestling Federation in 1993, where he would debut as the character of the Narcissist, Bobby Heenan's answer to Mr. Perfect. Although this wouldn't last long. After Hulk Hogan left the company, Vince McMahon was scrambling to find himself a new patriotic main eventer. This found Luger repackaged as an all-American wrestler, famously body slamming Yokozuna on the Intrepid. This led to him beginning the Lex Express tour, riding around the country in a red, white, and blue painted bus, all in preparation of him getting his World Championship match against Yokozuna at SummerSlam, with the stipulation that this would be his only shot at the title. But alas, according to some, Luger wasn't getting over the way they had expected, and so Lex would win the match, but he wouldn't get the title, and even though he would get another shot at it at WrestleMania 10, he still wouldn't win it then either. And then in 1995, he famously jumped ship back to WCW, debuting on their first ever episode of Monday Nitro. And while he would win a fair amount of gold upon his return, it's easy to forget that he never won anything while he was a part of WWF. Not even a run with the tag titles with British Bulldog as his tag partner when they were the Allied Powers. Go figure. Oh, and while we're talking about Lex Luger, I'm sure some of you are expecting to see Sting on this list. And while he does deserve a mention, I do feel like now would be a good time to add yet one more rule to the criteria here, as I think you should have at least 50 matches in WWE in order to really count. And now that we established that, let's just consider Sting as an alternate. Anyway, moving on. Starting his career way back in 1959, Harley Race would find himself in the AWA as Handsome Harley Race and specialized primarily as a tag team wrestler. He would bounce around between several promotions for a number of years before eventually leaving the AWA to join the NWA in order to try and become a solo star. And as such, this would be a fairly successful endeavor, as in 1973, he would have an upset victory to become the NWA World Champion by defeating Dory Funk Jr. But this wouldn't be his only run with the 10 pounds of gold, as Race would end up winning the title 8 times, a record that has only ever been bested by one other wrestler, who is of course Ric Flair. But then in 1986, Harley was less than enthused with his position in the company, especially under the guidance of Sam Muchnick, and so he went to the WWF to be managed by his longtime friend Bobby Heenan, and returning to the old Handsome Harley Race gimmick yet again. And while he would win the King of the Ring tournament, he wouldn't win any championships while in the company, leaving the promotion in 1989 after coming back from a hernia surgery. And yes, while Harley Race did win the King of the Ring, remember, this is about championships, not King of the Rings, not Royal Rumbles, and definitely not Slammy Awards. Oh, but while we're talking about Harley Race, well, that leads me to... Surprisingly enough, Harley Race would go on to manage someone who would also never win a world title in the WWF despite being a world champion elsewhere. After deciding to pursue a career in professional wrestling in 1985, the man that would be called Vader would develop a taste for being a main eventer pretty early on, getting a title match against Stan Hansen for the AWA World Heavyweight Championship within his first few years in the business. And even though he wouldn't win that match, he would win the Catch Wrestling Association World Heavyweight Championship in 1987. And from there, he would also win the IWGP Heavyweight Championship too. And in addition to that, Vader would also enter the Universal Wrestling Association, where he would of course course become a world champion there as well. And then he would become a part of World Championship Wrestling, where he would be world champion material 3 times. But then he would join the WWF, and after backstage politicking from one Shawn Michaels, Vader would never find himself holding the company's top prize, no matter how much he was supposed to. But to make matters worse, not only did he never win the WWF World title, but he would never win any title of any kind in the WWF at all. So yeah, we can all go ahead and thank Shawn Michaels for that one. The American Dream Dusty Rhodes would win the NWA title a total of 3 times, and combined he would be champion for a total of 107 days. First winning it on August 21st, 1979, then winning it again in June of 1981, and most recently in July of 1986. Oh, and on a completely unrelated note, I just want to point out that there was this wrestler named the Midnight Rider who had a retcon win with the NWA World title. Just thought that was something you might want to know. Now, these title wins would happen throughout a variety of different promotions all under the National Wrestling Alliance, such as Championship Wrestling from Florida, Georgia Championship Wrestling, and of course, Jim Crockett Promotions. And while it doesn't count as a major recognized world title, I do want to point out that Dusty Rhodes also won the PWF World Heavyweight Championship. PWF as in the Pro Wrestling Federation. Okay, that is definitely not the most creative name for a company. But putting that aside, one promotion that he would not win a world title in would of course be the World Wrestling Federation, which he would join just 9 days after his run in the PWF. Now, during this time, he would famously don the yellow polka dots, as well as starting his program with Sapphire and his feud with the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. This all culminated in a match in the 1991 Royal Rumble, where Dusty teamed up with Dustin to take on Virgil and the $1 Million Man. After this match, Rhodes would return to WCW, as well as having a brief run in Extreme Championship Wrestling. And topping this list, how could it ever be anyone else other than Jerry the King Lawler? Throughout his entire career, Jerry has won more titles of any kind throughout any promotion than any other professional wrestler ever. How many titles exactly? Well, I already did a video covering all that, and let's just say, it was a lot. Anyway, if you want more information, then go ahead and check that video out after this one. But out of his plethora of championships, many of which were world titles, not a single championship belt was won in the WWF. He somehow didn't even get a pity win with the hardcore title. And for any of you out there who might say, that's only because Jerry Lawler hates hardcore wrestling, well, I just have to say, the kayfabe is really strong with you, and you should watch more older Jerry Lawler matches. Well, there you go, 7 wrestlers that WWE really dropped the ball on. And one more time, I just want to say thank you for staying with me throughout the years, and if you're new to this channel, I hope you stick around, because we have plenty more good stuff to come. Anyway, thanks again, and as always, Dave knows.